Good afternoon, Judge Shapiro.
Hi, Morgan.
Let's see here. Okay, it looks like I can see and I think I can hear you. We have everybody available as well as the court reporter, and it looks like the defendant has a couple witnesses and they're all accounted for, just so you are aware, and I can bring attorneys in when you're ready.
I'm ready. How do I make this a group? I'm trying to get this so I can see everybody. There we go. Great. Okay. All right. We have a court reporter?
Yes, I'm here, Judge.
Oh, okay. You're not the one I'm used to. Okay, very good. Is it Ms. Mata?
It is.
Thank you. And attorneys who I see we have Ms. Waddell for the defendant, Mr. Rubenstein for the plaintiff. I believe that's it. And I understand, Ms. Waddell, you have a couple of a witness or two?
I have 3 witnesses, Your Honor. They're the troopers involved in this stop and investigation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to call the case. It's Harris v. Michigan State Police et al. 21-183 MZ in the Court of Claims. We're here today for a show cause hearing as to why there's a legal basis and a factual basis to retain Mr. Harris's property that was seized a little over 11 months ago pursuant to a traffic stop. So there's also an issue which we can turn to later about the second amended complaint, but we'll discuss that after we hear the testimony and argument. So Ms. Ms. Waddell, you can proceed with your first witness. And Ms. Mata, do you swear in the witnesses or shall I do so?
Either way, Judge. I have no preference, but I can do it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I called Trooper David Williams.
Hello.
Can you hear us, Mr. Williams?
I can.
Would I go ahead and swear the witness?
Judge, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Do you want me to do it or?
Please swear in the witness.
Thank you, Judge. Trooper Williams, if you'd raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please state your name for the record?
David Williams
And where are you employed?
with the Michigan State Police.
And what is your position with the Michigan State Police?
I'm a trooper.
And how long have you been employed by the Michigan State Police?
Approximately 8 years.
You indicated you're a trooper. Are you assigned to any special teams, task force, anything like that?
I am. I'm currently assigned to our hometown security team in the 5th District.
And just briefly, what is the hometown security team?
We work primarily as a traffic enforcement squad on I-94 and the interstates within the 5th District, primarily Van Buren, Berrien, and Calhoun County, additionally Kalamazoo, primarily doing traffic enforcement, both through civil, misdemeanor, and investigative into felonies coming throughout the interstates.
And were you working on, well, you understand what we're here for today is the Harris traffic stop. Were you working on April 21st, 2021?
I was.
And did you conduct a traffic stop of the plaintiff, Mr. Harris, in this case?
I did.
And what was the basis for the stop?
It was improper left lane driving. I observed the suspect vehicle, or the vehicle driven by the plaintiff, driving he was coming westbound. I observed him coming to my line of sight. He was in the left lane. There were no vehicles in the right lane, indicating that he was not passing anybody. He stayed in that lane all the way past my location until I pulled out to follow him to perform that traffic stop, at which time he then did move into the right lane. So a traffic stop was made for improper left lane driving on a interstate.
And when you activated your lights, did Mr. Harris stop?
He did.
And so once he stopped, what did you do next?
I made my initial contact with him, with Mr. Harris. He provided me with his identification card, which to me indicated that he did not have his driver's license. I believe we had a conversation about that, stating that he wasn't a valid driver. We further had a conversation because rental companies won't rent a vehicle to an individual with an ID card. I asked him who had rented the vehicle, and he stated that his sister had rented the vehicle.
Okay, so just for clarification, you asked him, I'm assuming, for a driver's license, that kind of thing, and he provided you with an ID card instead of a driver's license, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. And then you indicated that it was a rental vehicle. Had you observed that when you pulled it over?
Yeah, it was an out of state, I believe Louisiana plated. Oftentimes it's even without running the plate, I oftentimes could guess that that's what it was going to be. Lean later did confirm via their Secretary of State that it was a rental vehicle.
Okay, so at that point, what did you do next?
Yeah, so at that time, I actually went back to my car with his ID. We kind of had a brief conversation. I apologize. As far as while I was up at the car, he stated he was coming from Detroit. I could see on his ID he lived in Chicago, and he stated that's where he was returning to. He stated he'd been there for approximately 2 days. And at that time, I went back to my car to do some of my preliminary runs on both his person as well as the vehicle, while I kind of gathered his information.
Okay, and did you find anything significant when you ran him?
No, there was, I don't believe I saw, I believe he might have, I'm not positive. I don't believe there's anything that stood out. I think he might have had an out-of-state warrant, but I can't confirm that. I don't recall having that, but he did show, I did confirm that he had no operator's license. So at that time, I wanted to have further conversation, both to his travel history, but I also requested a secondary officer because at that time he minimally was committing the misdemeanor of driving with no operator's license.
So after your initial investigation, did you make contact with Mr. Harris again?
I did. I waited for my secondary officer, at which time I actually requested Mr. Harris exit the vehicle. At that time, he came back towards my vehicle, and we further discussed his travel history, where he was going to, as well as any of the belongings in the vehicle. At that time, I did confirm he had been in Detroit for 2 days. He said he was visiting family, and that his sister had rented the vehicle while he was in Chicago. Asked him to any narcotics in the vehicle, which I mean, in my questioning, I asked him whether there's cocaine, crack cocaine, heroin. He stated no to all of the above. At that time, I did ask him about currency in the vehicle, and he told me that there's $12,000 in the glove box.
Okay, and did you ask him additional questions about the $12,000?
I did. So the initial story, throughout my interview and process with him, I ended up being told 3 different stories. The initial story I was provided was that it was his sister's money and that she was the one who had rented the vehicle and that that's why the money was in the vehicle. I kind of went back and forth with him as to why his sister would leave such a large amount in the vehicle. And he just stated that his sister trusts him with his money or with her money. And at that time, I wanted to further confirm the possession of this cash. And so I asked him for his sister's number, which he did provide for me.
And did you contact his sister?
I did. So at that time, I contacted an individual over the phone. It was saved on his phone as Ray Ray. Later, I believe that it was Sharitha Whitmer. That being said, she did not provide her info to me, so I was unable to positively put a contact info in for her. She stated that she had not rented any vehicles for him. She further stated that she didn't know that he was out of town. She believed that he was still in the Chicago area. But she did confirm that she had an unknown amount of money that he had taken from her safe, that he had and it was that she'd given him consent to take. When I asked her how much money, she stated she didn't know. When I asked her to ballpark, she still didn't know and was unable to provide me with a number.
Okay. And was that the extent of your conversation with his sister?
I believe I talked to her about banking. She stated that he does banking for her. They're down in Chicago area, and that was why he had taken the money out, was to do the banking. She stated that she uses Chase Bank. That further up my suspicions. Chase Bank is a nationwide bank. I lived in Chicago. I further know there's Chase Banks in Chicago. It didn't make sense to me on that traffic stop that I would go and do banking 3 hours away in Detroit.
So you ended your call with the sister, I assume, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then what did you do at that point? Did you ask to search the car, or did you have further discussions with Mr. Harris?
I believe that off of that conversation, at that point, I had asked for verbal consent to search the vehicle, which I was provided. And at that point, I searched the vehicle.
And did you locate the cash?
We did. Myself and Officer Kremens were searching the vehicle. Officer Kremens, I observed him pull it out of the glove box. It was in the glove box in front of the front passenger seat. It was a large amount of cash bundled up with rubber bands.
And did you have further conversations with Mr. Harris about the cash?
I did. After we completed our search on the vehicle, I returned. He said it was kind of cold. It was actually approximately a year ago, and it was a colder day. And so we had him seated in one of our patrol cars so he wouldn't be cold. And at that time, I re-interviewed him, kind of putting all the information I'd gained so far from my investigation. At that point, Mr. Harris changed his story, or at the very least, he corrected items in it. He stated that he was coming from Detroit, as he said, but at that point, he reiterated that he's actually coming from his girlfriend's, who lives over in the Detroit area. And he quoted that she has money or came from money. And that was actually where he had received the money from. She had done 2 withdrawals for him through an ATM. And that was actually where the money came from. At that point, I was kind of furthering my conversation as to why she didn't cash app it, or why he was traveling with it instead of depositing it in a bank account. And he said he didn't really know. At that time, I began questioning him further as to his phones, and if there was any illegal activity that I would observe in his phones if I did seize them. He gave me verbal consent on scene to look through his phones, at which time, as I was looking through his phones, I observed numerous indicators of fraud, social security cards, driver's licenses, unemployment documents with those social security number, or I guess not with those, I can't testify to those same social security numbers, but numerous documentation for federal grants through the COVID relief fund. I observed all those on his images as I was looking through that with verbal consent.
And when you indicated he gave you verbal consent to search the phones, did the phones have passcodes on them?
I'm sorry, did the phones have?
They did, and further.
Passcodes, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, they did. And he provided those, further showing his willingness to cooperate, provided me those codes.
Okay. And so once you looked through his phones, did you ask him any questions about what you observed on the phones?
I did. At that point, I when I interview a lot of times, I'm pretty frank, and I let him know, hey, here's the suspicions. I see these signs of fraud.
505134.
I apologize. At that point I did. I said, hey, to me, this looks like there's a lot of fraud activity going on. How about we square up? And at that point, he stated some of the activity on the phones that I was observing was fraud, but I quote, it was old fraud that he had committed in the past, I guess. We didn't go how far. I think he said it was over a year old. But that was past fraud that he wasn't currently doing. Further, we had a conversation as to, I observed on some of the documents that it was COVID relief requests, and we went into that. And at that point, he admitted he was assisting companies with filing these COVID relief requests to the state or to the federal government, and he was getting paid out of those funds to do so. And that's where this money actually came from.
And what was your understanding, if any, about whether or not it was lawful for him to be paid out of those proceeds?
My understanding, and it's on camera, I have some knowledge on it. I know my understanding of that grant was that those funds have to go solely to those businesses, and those businesses solely have to pay both their bills and their employees as a result of those funds. And it can't go to anything else.
Okay. So at this point, what do you decide to do?
Yeah. So at that point, we have probable cause that there's crime being committed. And at that point, we move our stop, especially with the large amount of cash we were dealing with. We moved our stop back to our headquarters, which is in Paw Paw. We were only a short distance away. And so at that point, we moved our stop. Well, and I apologize. We moved that stop back. Prior to that, I do call our fraud team before we decide to move the stop. I apologize. So we called our fraud team, and I had a conversation with Sergeant Bonovitz.
May I interrupt for a moment? I just didn't understand. You said that you moved the stop. I didn't understand what that meant. Sorry.
Yeah, I apologize, sir, because I started to testify out of order, and that was just a mistake in my remembrance of the event. So we do move our stop, and what that, just to answer your question, when we are on the side of the freeway, once we have probable cause that a crime's committed, especially in something like this, our team's method of operation is often to move our stop off the freeway just because of the high chance of crashes or somebody being injured. So we actually move our stops to a closer, safe area off the freeway. And then going back to the question from Miss Waddell, I apologize. I called Sergeant Bonovitz, and we had a discussion as to the fraud that I was observing.
Okay. And you indicated that Sergeant Bonovitz was part of the fraud team, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And he's going to testify, so I will let him tell the court what he told you. But so at that point, you indicated you moved the stop, and I want to be clear, you didn't place Mr. Harris under arrest at this point. Was he allowed to go to his vehicle?
That's correct. Yep, I allowed him to return to his vehicle. He was never placed in handcuffs.
And so so where did you go at that point?
Yeah, so we drove, there was 3 vehicles, myself drove my own vehicle, and then the Officer Kremens drove his vehicle, and then Mr. Harris drove his vehicle, and we drove to 5th District headquarters in Paw Paw.
Okay, so Mr. Harris followed you in the vehicle he was driving, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so once you went to headquarters, what happened next?
From there, just because the money, it was a large amount of money in cash, both hundreds, 50s, and other denominations. We have a cash counting machine that accurately records the exact amounts as well as specific bills. And so at that time, my 2 sergeants assisted us in counting that cash and documenting it.
And do you recall offhand?
I apologize.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I apologize. Yes, the cash amount totaled $19,300.
So you seized the $19,300, and then did you also seize the 2 cell phones?
I did.
Okay, and so at that point, did you release Mr. Harris?
Yes, we did a couple other things just to make sure I talk about. We did seize the cash, we seized the cell phones, but I did also request, we have a DI-20, it's a consent form for both of his phones, at which point I had him write both the phones in as well as their passcodes, and he signed a copy for both those phones to be searched with consent.
Okay, so then he was released?
Yes, yep, he left the scene.
Okay, so what happened next with the investigation?
I was pretty limited as far as anything that happened after that. The next day, I believe myself and one of the sergeants transferred over all the property from the case over to Sergeant Bonovitz, who came down to our office. And from that point on, I was no longer a part of the investigation.
I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Judge, you're muted. I apologize.
All right, Mr. Rubenstein, you have cross-exam?
Yes, briefly, Your Honor. Thank you. Trooper Williams, is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Trooper Williams, you indicated that you had an inventory sheet where my client put in his passcodes. Is that what, did I heard you correctly?
Yes, sir. On our consent form, the DI-20, typically in that on that form with the phones, we would have put those codes on, or at the very least, had them documented somewhere so that we wouldn't have to use our gray key to get into the phones.
Okay. So you don't know if that's actually on the DI-20 form?
Without looking at it right now, I would not be comfortable testifying to it. I know he provided them to me. At no point did we use a gray key to break into the phones. We used the codes that were provided by Mr. Harris to get into the phones, and I can testify to it.
All right. Did you prepare a report for this matter, a police report?
I did. Yes, sir.
Have you provided that to Attorney Waddell?
I believe through I didn't personally, but through the appropriate means they were provided.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you believed that you saw, and it was kind of, it's kind of vague, some evidence of fraud, and you mentioned COVID relief images. Is that right?
Yeah, if you want me to make it less vague, social security cards, driver's licenses, forms filled out that were completed for multiple individuals within the phone, all just images of them, no actual documentation, saved in files. They're just images saved on a phone of numerous individuals, clearly not just one person, also under LLCs, which oftentimes is somewhat irregular to me. Okay,
so he didn't actually have any other driver's license or social security cards on him, did he?
Nope.
My client was very cooperative, it sounds like, with your investigation.
That's correct.
Okay, now the fact that he had images of other driver's licenses or social security cards, is that in and of itself a crime?
I guess no, you'd have to use them in some way in order to do it, which I think was shown through the multiple forms that he has completed on his phone.
Okay, now you don't know.
At that point, I would say it was.
I'm sorry?
I said, as soon as he begins completing those forms, I did believe that it was criminal in nature.
Okay,
and he admitted to getting paid by them.
Have any criminal charges been filed against my client anyway in any court?
I'm unable to testify to that. As I stated, my investigation was transferred over to our fraud unit.
Okay, and you don't know that my client used those images for anything illicit or illegal in any way. Isn't that true?
I do. That's completely untrue. He stated that he used those to commit fraud.
All right, now, social security cards, driver's license, COVID forms, none of those would pay in cash. Is that a true statement? COVID relief money didn't come in cash.
I also stated, the problem is that the company stated he stated the companies were paying him $5,000 to complete those forms.
So if a company pays in cash for a service rendered, is that illegal?
It is if it's being used out of funds that aren't designated to do so.
Okay, do you have any evidence that it was being used out of funds that weren't designated as such?
Nope, that's why we do an investigation, sir.
Your investigation's been going on for over a year now, is that correct?
Not my investigation.
Okay, the investigation that your office is conducting has been going on for approximately a year. Is that true?
I believe so.
Okay, now, just taking your testimony as on face value, in the event that an entity asked Mr. Harris to fill out some COVID relief forms and shouldn't have done that, who committed the crime? The entity who actually filed the COVID relief forms or the person who prepared them?
I believe in this case, go on.
I would just object. That calls for a legal conclusion, but.
Well, Your Honor, this whole thing to some degree calls for a legal conclusion. Probable cause does call for a legal conclusion. The witness obviously is here to testify as to his understanding of probable cause. I think it's.
I'm fine answering that. In my opinion, both parties are culpable.
Under what statute and what law would the preparer of COVID relief forms be responsible and not the actual person defrauding the government?
Well beyond my scope of ability to answer in this.
Okay. Now, if I improperly were to get COVID relief funds and you prepare the documents to get those, who gets arrested? You or me?
What's your question, sir?
If I improperly obtain COVID relief funds from the government and you, as a knowledgeable individual, provided me the service by preparing forms for me, which one of us is going to get arrested?
Both of us.
Are you aware of a law that would require the person preparing a form to be arrested for that service?
If they're knowledgeably committing a felony, absolutely. You want me to I can look it up if you want, but I sure Ms. Waddell can provide it as well. If you knowledgeably commit a felony fraud, whether you're aiding and abetting or whether you're doing it yourself or taking the funds, I assure you there's a law out there in the state of Michigan that you'll be arrested for.
Now, COVID relief funds, again, were not paid in cash. Is that a true statement?
As far as how the government provides them to the companies?
Correct.
Is that your question?
That is.
You're correct. Yes, I find it unlikely that the government is sending cash bills out.
So how, just so I'm clear, how are you tying $19,300 in cash to improper COVID relief that you believe some entity out there was attempting to get?
And I quote from Mr. Harris, I was getting paid $5,000 to fill out LLC forms from these individuals, and I was getting paid by those companies to do so.
Okay. Officer Williams, I get paid to fill out LLC
Trooper.
forms.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Trooper
Trooper,
Harris,
go ahead.
Trooper Williams. I get paid to fill out LLC forms also, sometimes in cash. Are you going to arrest me?
Are you doing so lawfully?
Of course. Would you have any
Okay.
cause to come
Well,
and
I
take
won't.
my money? If I'm filling out forms for a third party, do you have any
Did
cause
you have
to
the
come and
proper
take my money?
documentation? Did you admit,
Okay.
did you admit to felonies?
Just one moment, please. Thank you, Judge. I don't know if you want to caution the witness we're talking over the top of each other. It's very difficult and we're on Zoom, so there's a lag.
I apologize, ma'am.
Okay, so the last question I have is, of course, would you have any cause to take my, just a moment, phone if I'm filling out forms for a third party?
Mr. Rubenstein, can you ask a question for me so that I can answer it?
Yeah, you didn't understand the question?
No, can you repeat it?
Sure. If I get paid money to fill out forms for a client, whether they be LLC forms, COVID relief forms, and I get paid cash, would you have any cause to seize that cash?
If that's all the information I provided, then I would say no.
Okay. Now, the statements you allege Mr. Harris made, were they recorded?
They were.
And what kind of device?
We had a in-car body cam as well as our in-cars activated and working. The only microphone that was not working was my body worn microphone was not working.
Okay, but there were microphones working that caught this entire
That's correct.
conversation? Okay.
That's correct. He was seated in a patrol car at the time.
Have those recordings been provided to anybody?
Ms. Waddell, have you been provided those?
I have.
Oh, yes, they just haven't been
Yes, sir.
provided to me?
Correct. You're not entitled to discovery at council.
Now, you had two third parties, both my client's sister and his girlfriend, that indicated to you that they gave him an undisclosed amount of cash. Isn't that right?
It's incorrect.
Oh, I
I
thought I
never
heard you
was-
say.
No, so he stated that his girlfriend in Detroit gave him the money. That being said, I was never able to identify or get in contact with her, so I never was given any statement from her. And then I further I can't even positively identify her because she didn't want to identify herself when I was talking to her, but his sister, that he identified as his sister, Ray, later declined that those funds were hers.
I'm sorry, decline? I thought you said that she admitted that she gave him.
Yes, initially, you're correct. Initially, she stated that they were hers. I apologize.
Okay, that she had given him consent to be in possession of that money?
Yes.
Okay. You asked about drugs, it sounds like early on in the traffic stop.
Correct.
Is that true?
Yes.
Were there any drugs or any illegal substances found in the car?
It all depending on your definition of narcotics, there was marijuana, a decent amount going towards Chicago, which, could have been considered interstate traffic. But other than that, no.
And my client hadn't left the state. So.
Correct. Yep. You're correct. Yep. Just off of his statements, but you're correct. That's why nothing was charged on it. But you asked about narcotics. I just want to make sure I address marijuana is a narcotic. That being said, not necessarily an illegal narcotic in the state of Michigan.
Did my client appear to be under the influence of any type of drugs or alcohol?
No.
What's the status of the investigation?
I believe we have further testimony coming as to that.
Do you know?
Or I can just say, I don't know. No, I don't. I don't know. So I can just answer it that way.
Okay. How long do you intend to keep my client's $19,300?
I think you're confused on what a transferred over to case means. I don't have the money. We have different departments within our state departments, and I don't have that money. We've moved it on to our fraud unit.
Okay. When is that money expected to be returned?
Still confused on how I would know that when I keep telling you we don't have it and I'm not part of the investigation.
Okay. So what you know is that a year ago, you stopped my client. He was cooperative. He gave you consent to look at his phone, and you saw some images of COVID relief forms, social security cards, and driver's license, and you took $19,000 for it. That's basically your testimony?
Correct. And the admission that he had committed fraud. Correct.
He said he committed fraud in the past?
That's correct.
Okay. Did he admit to committing any current fraudulent crimes?
He admitted that what I was looking at was fraud.
Okay.
I just want to make sure you have it correct.
Okay. He told you that what you're looking at is fraud? He said those
That's
words?
correct. Yeah, correct. Fraud. But then he stated it was old though. So just to make sure, and that was on one phone, and the other phone had further evidence of the same exact thing. Therefore, I could easily have, and I knew to have probable cause that fraud was being committed because the old fraud was the same as the new fraud on the other phone.
The old fraud was same as the new fraud? That's what you said?
The images I was observing appeared to be the exact same.
Okay. Okay. And my client didn't tell you, actually, nobody told you at any point that the $19,300 was a product of any type of crime?
Outside of the fact that he admitted that he was gaining it through the COVID relief forms that he was filling out for companies and getting paid $5,000 to do so, at which point my interpretation of those funds that it was improperly used. So in my interpretation was that he admitted that he was misusing or getting paid through the misuse of COVID relief funds.
There's something illegal about filling out a form for another party?
No, there's something about misusing government funds.
Right. But you said my client claims that he got paid to fill out the forms. Did I hear you right?
Correct. But he knew exactly where the funding was coming from. And that's what, if he had no idea where that was coming from, he stated he knew exactly where it was coming from. That would be like committing a fraud unbeknownst to you, where one of the elements was intent. Whereas in this case, intent or not, he knew where they were coming from. So I don't even have to fulfill an element of intent because he knew it. It's fulfilled whether it's implied or not.
Well, let's back up a little bit. A party who my client may have filled out COVID relief forms for, just filling out those forms is not evidence of fraud, right? A lot of people got COVID relief, legitimately, right?
Correct.
So filling out a form for a business to get COVID relief, where's the crime?
Again, I think it's like my 14th time answering it for you, sir.
Rupert,
It's
just answer his question.
From those, it's getting paid from those funds when that's not how you're supposed to get paid. That's the government is giving the money to those companies specifically with implications of how it can be spent.
Okay, now,
Mr. Williams, I may ask one question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I was a little confused. Did Mr. Harris indicate to you that he was being paid with government funds or that he was being paid by the people he was filling the forms out for?
The way he stated to me was that he was getting paid from the funds.
Trooper Williams, and I'm sorry if this is a little redundant, but the government doesn't pay in cash, right?
Correct.
All right, now, if my client filled out a form for a business, if there was COVID relief provided, it wouldn't come until much later. Isn't that a true statement?
Honestly, sir, I don't know exactly how it would come down later in the table, as far as filling out the form and then when the cash would come. So I really can't testify to how quickly the money would come, whether you fill out the form and you get it in a day or whether it takes months. I don't know. He spent 2 days in Detroit. Maybe that's how long it takes.
Okay, and cash never comes. We've already established that. The government doesn't pay in $100 bills. Is that true?
That seems accurate to me as well.
Okay. So I'm going back to this is gonna be my last question. If you pull me over and you see forms that I filled out for clients for a fee, how are you going to determine that that's a criminal activity?
I would further my investigation by asking, just like I did in this case. I would look at your phone. I would have past admissions of fraud, past admissions, and then I have further evidence of multiple social securities. Do you keep, when you do those LLCs, and this isn't me asking you a question, this is me asking myself this as I go through, do you keep their social security cards from years ago on your phone when you fill those things out for them? Or do you document them properly and keep them in a secure folder on your computer? Because I'm guessing as I have a conversation with you about that, that's what you do, is you have a folder on your computer, document it appropriately, and you keep them secure and off your phone. Whereas when I have fraud, I view them on people's phones and they keep them on their phones until that those social security numbers are so burned out that nothing good is going to come from those. And so as I do my investigation and I stop you, sir, on the side of the road, I'm guessing you don't have that documentation on your phone. I'm guessing you have it all safely secured somewhere and it no longer raises my suspicions.
Now, keeping that documentation on a phone is in no way, shape, or form a crime, right?
It's correct. All I was trying to develop was probable cause.
Okay. And fair to say, if you would have stopped me in the same instance, things probably would have looked a little bit different than they did with Mr. Harris.
Not if you had been committing the same crimes.
Well, he hasn't been charged with a crime, right? He sits here today, he hasn't been charged with anything.
Gentlemen,
Okay.
I'm confused how this works. I thought I had to answer your question, and I'm trying to. And
Please. Judge,
counsel,
you were trying to say something.
Mr. Rubenstein, no need to argue with the witness. I understand the nature of his testimony. If there are additional facts you wish to bring out, you may proceed, but at this point, you don't need to argue the law with him. That's for us to determine.
Understood. I have no further questions for this witness.
Any redirect?
Just one. Trooper Williams, you indicated that before you seized anything, you had a conversation with Lieutenant Bonovitz of the Fraud Division, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and fraud is what he investigates, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and he advised you to seize this money, correct?
That's correct.
Objection, that would
No
be hearsay.
He's testifying next. It'll be fine, counselor. No further questions.
I'll overrule that objection. Very good. Officer, your testimony is
Thank you.
complete. It's the first time I've ever seen a deposition or testimony from a vehicle, but it works.
It's better that than my kids screaming as we talked. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Your Honor, may he be excused?
Yes, he may be excused.
Could I just, before we call the next witness, I think this is kind of important, and I don't know if anyone else had difficulty with the trooper. He had a significant lag and he was freezing from time to time. Did anyone see that? Just me?
I did see it.
I
Okay,
didn't.
because I didn't have, everybody else is crystal clear and loud, and it was, I don't know if it was from the car, but just to let you know, it's really, he was speaking over and there was such a lag, it was really difficult to make the record. So if we have that with the next witness. Thank you, Judge.
Are you ready for my next witness, Your Honor? I would call Lieutenant Bonovitz.
Good afternoon. Can I be heard?
We can hear you. We can't see. Oh, now we can see you. Yes. Okay. Swear the witness.
Yes, is it Detective Bonovitz? If you'd raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And Lieutenant Bonovitz, can you please state your name for the record?
Sure. Taylor Bonovitz.
And where are you employed?
I am currently employed with the Michigan State Police within the MSP. I'm the lieutenant in charge of our fraud investigation team for the west side of Michigan.
And how long have you been employed by MSP?
I am July 25th, will be 23 years.
And how long have you been with the fraud investigation unit?
I started with the fraud investigation unit as a trooper approximately 2015. I was promoted to a detective sergeant in 2017, and then promoted to the lieutenant position, which is newly created as of October 3rd of last year. The newly created aspect of it back during the incident that we're here for today, our unit consisted of 2 troopers and a sergeant, myself being the sergeant, on the west side of the state. Currently, the west side of the state now has a team in Grand Rapids, which is 3 troopers and a sergeant, and a team in Kalamazoo, which is 3 troopers and a sergeant.
Okay. And you indicated that you're aware of what we're here about today, the incident involving Mr. Harris. Do you recall being contacted by Trooper Williams concerning the traffic stop of Mr. Harris?
I do.
Okay, and what do you, go ahead.
I was just going to say Trooper Williams did contact me via telephone. That was on April 21st of 2021. Told me that he was on a traffic stop with an individual and he had located a large amount of money. He also had told me that he had gotten consent to look at the individual's phone, and he had observed tax forms, driver's licenses, social security cards that did not belong to the individual, later found to be Mylon Harris, on the phone. He also told me that Mr. Harris had told him that what he was doing was illegal, and Trooper Williams was looking for guidance. Our unit would typically, in instances where our HST stopped a vehicle that would be fraud related, possible fraud related crimes, they'd get a hold of us and they would turn those investigations over to us. And in this instance, based on the images that were on the phone, the large sum of money, the admission from Mr. Harris that what he was doing was illegal, I told Trooper Williams that go ahead and seize the money, seize the phones, and I asked Trooper Williams to make sure that he got a good phone number for somebody that I could get a hold of in order to, if it turned out that there was not a crime committed, that we'd be able to get the items back to them. I did this because my role as a sergeant also included property that the team handled, and it can be very difficult if we take over a case from another law enforcement agency and we don't have a way to get a hold of the suspect or the people who we got the items from. It makes it very difficult to get back those items. Trooper Williams said he had gotten a sister's phone number, and at that point I thought, okay, that's good enough. So I instructed him to go ahead and seize those items.
Okay. And did you give him any instructions about forfeiture paperwork? That's been an issue in this case.
No.
Did you advise him to do forfeiture paperwork or not to do forfeiture paperwork?
No, at this point, the civil forfeiture aspect of the law I didn't feel it pertained to what was going on. The large sum of money, I believed, was ill-gotten gains, possibly from criminal activity. So the money was seized as possible proceeds of a criminal offense.
Okay, so he seizes the money, your unit agrees to take over the investigation, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, did you take possession of the cash and phones?
I did. The following day, I went down to our 5th District headquarters. We recounted the money to make sure that it was what was properly entered. It was 19,300. And then I took possession of the 2 phones as well. At that point, I had a conversation with Trooper Williams regarding the sister's phone number. Again, I wanted to make sure that I had a way, if through the criminal investigation, it didn't prove to be a criminal offense, that we'd be able to get the property back to Mr. Harris.
Okay, so at that point, what did you do first as part of your investigation?
First, I contacted the phone number that Trooper Williams provided to me, that he identified as being Mr. Harris's sister. She told me that she didn't want to talk to me, that they had obtained an attorney. So I asked if I sent her my email, if she could email the attorney's information. Again, my reasoning is I want to be able to, if at the end of the investigation, criminal charges are not filed, I want to make sure I have a point of contact to return the property that we've seized. I received a phone call from I believe Mr. Rubenstein or one of his representatives later on. I introduced myself, informed them that we would be investigating this, provided my contact information, and requested he contact me if he had any questions regarding the criminal investigation that is still ongoing.
Okay, so as far as the criminal investigation, what was your next steps?
I brought the phones down to our 5th District computer crimes based on the consent that Mr. Harris had given. Our computer crimes did download both phones. They were quite large files that they downloaded. So I took it back and I tried opening the files, and my computer would not allow me to open those files. So I got back in touch with computer crimes, and they ended up giving me a second copy of what they had downloaded from Mr. Harris's phones.
Okay, I want to take a step back. How long did it take for the CCU unit to get you the download?
looking at, refreshing my memory from the report, 5/24 of 21 was when I transported the phones, or when Detective Trooper Planger, one of the troopers on the team, checked the phones out of our electronic database and brought them down. And then I picked up the phones 6/16 of 21. I attempted to look at the phones on July 13th, and that's when I wasn't able to open any or access any of the data.
Okay, so eventually computer crimes fixed whatever issues we're having and you were able to open the data, correct?
I started reviewing the data August 8/23 of 21. I was finally able to get into it. Again, there was a lot of information, a lot of data. It was causing my computer to run extremely slow. There were over 40,000 individual photos that was on the one phone with the data that I was looking at. And I started going through, clicking off, checking off the items that I believed could show a criminal activity, either identity theft, fraud, basically just doing a quick check off of social security cards, credit cards. There were driver's license photos. There was photos of unemployment insurance paperwork. There was COVID relief photos on there. There is text messages, conversations back and forth that had to deal with obtaining funds from the government and the process on how to do that.
Okay, so you indicated you started going through the data on the phones. Then what happened?
And then I got a new computer and I attempted to transfer all the information that I had done from the old computer that was going slow onto a hard drive. And something happened in between that, and all the work I had done was lost. So it needed to start over. And that was right around the time I got promoted. And so now the investigation to re-go through all the phone and all the data has been turned over to Detective Trooper Coles of the Kalamazoo office. I apologize for the ring in the background, Your Honor.
Okay, so I want to just take one step back to when you had the conversation with Trooper Williams. Based on the information that he was providing you, and based on your training and experience, was that information consistent with potential unemployment fraud and or PPP loan fraud?
It was consistent with identity theft, PPP fraud. It was consistent with potentially many different types of fraud. I believe there was probable cause at that point to believe that there was a crime that was being committed or had been committed. It was just going to take an investigation to determine whether or not the circumstances and the facts of a crime.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Rubenstein, any?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Sergeant Bonovitz, you said something in direct examination I took note of. You said you thought that the cash may be possible proceeds of a criminal offense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I heard you correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now you're aware that a possible criminal offense is not a probable criminal offense. Are you aware of that?
I believe at the time we had probable cause to believe that it was ill-gotten gains from a crime.
Okay, but that's not what I asked you. I'm just asking if you're aware that a possible criminal offense is not the same as a probable criminal offense.
My
you-
verbiage that I used, you are correct, but
And there was possibly identity theft, PPP fraud, and as you indicated, many other types of fraud. Those were all possible based on what you saw. But none of them were probable. Is that accurate?
this is an ongoing criminal investigation.
What's the status currently of the investigation?
Once the investigation is complete, it will be forwarded to a prosecutor's office or the attorney general's office, or turned over if to a federal agency if the investigation warrants.
I understand, Sergeant Bonovitz, that that's a procedure. My question was, what's the current status of the investigation?
It's still being investigated as a
Okay.
criminal offense.
Are you currently involved in the investigation in any way?
As a supervisor, I am.
Okay, when was the last time you looked into this case?
I'm currently looking at my report as we speak, sir.
Okay, well, for the purpose of testimony, not investigation, correct?
Correct, correct.
When was the last time you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've instructed Trooper Coles to make this his priority.
All right, now, you did, at least as of August of last year, roughly 8 months ago, you did have an opportunity to review everything on that phone. You got it all printed out. You fixed your technical issues, your computer issues, everything got resolved. You saw everything. Is that correct?
No, I did not see everything. I was in the process of going through the 40,000 plus photos. I hadn't even completed going through all the photos yet. And
All right.
Just so we're clear, you said printed out. There was nothing that was printed out. Everything was pertaining to the phones was done digitally.
Okay, now, aside from all of the possible crimes out there, after you had an opportunity to review everything, what are the likely crimes that you believe were committed here?
That's going to be determined upon once a prosecutor or the attorney general's office reviews our complaint. They will make the determination on what criminal charges, if any, to file.
Okay, what criminal charges do you believe were likely?
That's going to be up to the prosecutor's office or the attorney general's office.
Okay, so when you say you believe you had probable cause, you don't know what you actually think you had probable cause for. Would that be a true statement?
Based on the information that was provided to me by Trooper Williams, I believe that there was probable cause to believe a crime was committed.
Okay, but you don't know which crime?
At this point, it's going to be determined upon our investigation in completely reviewing the phones and all the information that is on that, and then possible interviews after that.
Did you
But this
conduct
is still
any?
an open criminal investigation.
I'm aware of that. Did you conduct any interviews?
The only interview that could have been construed as an interview may have been my phone call with who I believe to be Mr. Harris's sister. And that was where she said that she had hired an attorney and possibly interview either yourself or your representative when I made the phone call. Those were the only two interviews that.
Now, of all of these pictures of driver's licenses and COVID forms and social security cards, did you contact any of the people that were identified on those forms?
At this point, this is a criminal investigation. My work that I was doing on those on the phones was clicking off. I have not interviewed anybody at this point, so I have not spoken with anybody.
Okay, so there's no victim who told you their identity was stolen or COVID relief funds were illegally gotten through their company? Nobody has told you anything like that?
Based on my investigation that I had done up until my computer died and I lost all the information, no.
How long do you think it would be reasonable to hold this property without charging an individual?
Until the prosecutor, until a prosecutor determines whether or not a crime has been committed, at which point, if so, then at the end of the legal process, I would request that the prosecutor's office work and get a legal opinion from the judge on what should happen with the money. If no charges are filed in this case, then the money gets turned back over to Mr. Harris.
All right, now, finally, and I'm almost done, but aside from your conversations with Trooper, I believe it was Williams, aside from your conversations with him, is there any piece of information that you have or have located that ties this money to any possible crime that you were investigating?
The just the probable cause based on the pictures on the phone, the driver's licenses that I observed on the phone. This is a criminal investigation. Fraud investigations unfortunately take a long time. So the next steps, once the phones are gone through and subjects are identified, then there'll be interviews conducted.
Okay, but my question was there anything in those images on the phone or anything outside of your conversation with Trooper Williams that connected this particular money to any of these possible crimes?
The fact that Mr. Harris had the money along with the phones.
So any money that he had, you would have concluded was likely to be the result of a crime?
No, I believe a reasonable person would question $19,300 in cash that is being transported in a glove box.
So in your estimation, what's the dollar value that would not have subjected this money to seizure? How much would that have been?
Well, I think that I think anything over I would have to say anything 5,000 or below would probably not be something that I would think a reasonable person would be concerned with being transported across. And even that seems high.
Is that a policy in Michigan State Police, or is that just your opinion?
No, that's just my opinion.
Okay, so another officer might say 3,000, another officer might say 10,000.
Yes, sir.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
I'm sorry?
No, Your Honor, thank
Did
you.
you say no?
No.
I do have one question. Which is, Lieutenant, when you told Officer Williams, Trooper Williams, excuse me, to seize the money and the phones, what, if any, was your understanding of the legal basis to do so?
That we probable cause to believe that based on the admission from Mr. Harris, the photos that were observed on the phone, and the large quantity of money, that I believe that the money was the proceeds from ill-gotten gains, and that's why we seized the money, and it is currently being held pending criminal review by either prosecutor or AG's office.
Thank you. That was the only question I had. Any objection to this witness being excused?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Appreciate your testimony.
Okay, and I will call Trooper Thomas Coles.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Swear the witness, please.
Trooper Coles, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Detective Coles, can you please state your name for the record?
My first name is Thomas, last name is Coles.
Okay, and where are you employed?
I work for the Michigan State Police, currently assigned to the fraud unit on the west side of the state in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And how long have you been with the Michigan State Police?
I've been with the Michigan State Police for 13 years. Prior to that, I was a deputy in 2 different counties in Michigan.
Now, we've already heard from Trooper Williams and Trooper Bonovitz, and it's my understanding that the investigation into potential criminal activity by Mr. Harris has been turned over to you at this point. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and do you recall when that was?
I would estimate January or February of this year. I got on the team, basically the first of the year, beginning of January is when I started. And by the time I, learned different trainings, just in-house type housekeeping things, it was probably the end of January, beginning of February before I learned of it.
Okay, so once you were assigned the investigation, what did you do?
So I reviewed the case, read the reports that existed to that point, and then I was given the downloads of the phone, or 2 phones, and I began reviewing those, reviewing chats between Mylon, Harris, and other people, and reviewing videos, pictures, things like that.
And just for my edification, how much data were you given?
I don't know in terms of gigabytes or anything like that. I remember one of the phones has 1,700 chat strings, and each of those strings can be pages long, multiplied by 1,700 on one phone. And then the other phone has another 900 and some odd chat strings that again are pages long.
Okay, so you're going through that information as part of your investigation, correct?
Yes, yeah. Additionally, I remember there one of the phones is something like 40,000 videos and pictures. The other phone, I don't remember the exact number on those, but it's a large volume of information.
And the magic question is when do you think your investigation will be complete?
I guess it would be hard for me to pick a date. I would hope at this point, I'm more than halfway through the information. And then translating all that to a piece of paper, that also takes time.
And at this point, we heard from Lieutenant Bonovitz that there's a few options. You would turn over once your investigation is complete, you turn it over to either a prosecutor, the AG's office, or potentially a federal agency. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and what would be the basis for turning it over to a federal agency based on what you've observed thus far?
So the reason it may go to a federal agency would be twofold. One, because there seem to be multiple states involved. A lot of different talk about unemployment in different states: Indiana, Illinois, Colorado, California, Pennsylvania, in addition to federal PPP loans. So that's why it might go to a federal agency eventually.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
I have just a few. Trooper Coles, what evidence have you seen thus far about likely criminal activity?
Several text messages where Mylon initiates the contact with someone, asking if they're interested in filing for Blue Vine, or which was a company that was in charge of distributing PPP loans. Womply.com, that's another site that he seemed to use often. He would offer people the chance to get $20,000 in a federal loan, and then he would go on to explain that he would keep 5,000, or they would owe him 5,000, or sometimes a different amount of money, maybe 3,000 or 4,000, and then they would get X amount, whatever the difference was between approximately 20,000 and what he wanted for a cut in that particular situation.
All right, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
In addition to unemployment, where he would, it would go both ways. Sometimes he would reach out and offer to people, he'd say, hey, are you interested in getting X amount of dollars? I can help you out, or something worded like that. Or they would reach out to him and say, hey, I heard from a friend that you can get me unemployment in state A, B, C, or D.
All right. Now, on these chats that you've seen regarding what you believe is PPP money, Blue Vine and Womply, did those chats appear that he was simply taking the proceeds of the PPP money, or he was getting a fee, irrespective of whether or not the person actually ended up with money?
Yeah, so that how a typical conversation would play out is the application would go through. Once the people receive money, they would get a deposit. One common theme that I would see over and over was the money would get deposited into a Chime bank account, and then they would transfer money to a cash app that Mylon would supply them. I believe the transaction limit was $2,500. So they'd transact $2,500 to whatever cash app he said, and they would do that on one or two occasions, or that in a combination with them pulling cash from an ATM and meeting him up somewhere, typically in Chicago, and giving him cash. Or in the conversations, it appears that they're on the way to go meet up with the cash.
Okay, okay. So the cash would not be the money given by the federal government. They provide direct deposits or checks, as you indicated, Womply, Blue Vine. They would put that money into an account, correct?
Well, the money would originally transact in a wire transfer, and then the owner would either pull the money out or transact it again in a wire transfer via the Cash App.
Now, and similar question with unemployment benefits. Does unemployment, to your knowledge, deal with cash? Do they ever pay cash benefits out to people?
I don't have any knowledge of that. I don't know how they give
Okay.
them the money.
Okay, so are you aware of anything illegal about assisting an entity or a person with unemployment applications or with COVID PPP applications? Are you aware of any criminal activity that prohibits that?
I don't know that that's illegal.
Okay. And just so I'm clear, if I illegally got COVID money and I committed a crime and I went and got my car washed and paid $5 to get my car washed, did that car wash commit a crime?
Well, I see what you're saying there, but it's certainly a different, you're using that money for something else, not not to help you get that money.
Okay. I have no additional questions at this point in time.
Okay, very good. Is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, this witness is excused.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That
Detective.
concludes.
I have no
Okay,
additional witnesses, Your Honor.
very good. So that concludes the evidentiary portion of our hearing. Both counsel are welcome to make argument based upon the evidence if they wish to do so. I guess Ms. Waddell, you first.
Thank you, Your Honor. To be clear, as my troopers testified, Mr. Harris admitted that what he was doing was illegal. And in fact, it is. I know Mr. Rubenstein had questions about this, but under the PPP laws, agents are permitted to assist. However, agents are not allowed to be paid from the proceeds that are received. The way the whole PP loan thing worked was any agent had to be paid by the bank because the banks were using these SBA, they had SBA loans. They would be paid by the bank. They could not take more than 1%, provided the loan was under $350,000, which I believe all of Mr. Harris's loans were. But they cannot take the proceeds. And again, that's precisely what Mr. Harris was doing here. He'd say, "I'll get you 20,000, you give me 5." That's illegal under the federal law. In addition, the unemployment, obviously, we're seeing in the news all this unemployment fraud that's been going on. Based on his own admissions, the amount of money, the evidence shown on the phones, these officers absolutely had PC to seize this evidence. And again, you've got automobile exception here. This evidence is easily, if they waited to go get a warrant, the cash is gone, the phones are deleted. So that justifies the seizure as evidence in this case. It's being retained as evidence in this case, and it's not being retained for forfeiture purposes unless or until there's a conviction. So that's what's going on here. And we've been very reticent, candidly, to provide all of this information because it is an ongoing investigation. We obviously don't want Mr. Harris contacting all these individuals that are potential witnesses, but here we are. So it's not that anything nefarious is going on. We're just trying to protect the integrity of the investigation. For this court's purposes, there was PC for this seizure. It's lawful. And we would request that the officers be able to complete their investigation and retain the evidence until that investigation is complete.
So I understand then that the basis for the legality of the seizure without a warrant or an arrest was the automobile exception.
Right, exigent circumstances, Your Honor. If evidence can be destroyed, it can be seized.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Rubenstein, anything?
Sure, Your Honor. Well, the problem is there's nothing that ties this cash to these purported possible criminal endeavors. In fact, the cash is the antithesis of any proceeds of these endeavors because proceeds of these endeavors are electronic. They're not paid with cash. There would be no possible way that my client could receive cash proceeds from these purported and possible crimes. Your Honor, I'm going to use the term possible crimes because that's what Sergeant Bonovitz's term. He said there's a lot of possible crimes here. Identity theft, PPP fraud, many different types of fraud. He had a list of possibilities. There is nothing here that is probable in any way. Now, in the event that this court, I'm sorry, in the event that this court, yeah.
Do you believe that if there was probable cause to seize, that it was proper to do so without an arrest or a search warrant based upon the automobile or exigent circumstances exception to the warrant requirement?
No, I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that for a couple of reasons. Well, the automobile exception doesn't apply here because purportedly my client gave consent to search. So they didn't have any probable cause before his consent. They pulled him over on a bad license or a no license on person. So that wouldn't give them, and there was no arrest. So there would be no search incident to arrest. Counsel's point about the possibility that anything that could be eliminated then creates an exigent circumstance, Your Honor, is just way, way too broad. Okay, there is nothing defining about a stack of cash. Okay, I mean, in fact, and there's no amount that's been suggested that was from a criminal activity, from what crime. We have evidence, we have testimony that my client's sister acknowledged that he had an undisclosed amount of cash from her. You have another, some other testimony, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I get that, but my question, and maybe you're answering it, is specifically, forget about the arguments about whether or not there's probable cause. What I want to know is, if there's probable cause, do you concede that a seizure of that evidence without an arrest or search warrant was proper as an exception to the warrant requirement?
I do not, Your Honor, because the probable cause would have given cause to arrest. They didn't have that. You can't transfer probable cause and say, well, we didn't have probable cause to arrest, but we want you to apply that same standard, mind you, to this personal property without giving my client those same rights. Okay, if there was probable cause to arrest, these officers are aware they have the ability and authority to do so. So to suggest that, no, they can just take all of this stuff. And by the way, mind you, this is indefinite in nature. As I look at the timeline, my client was pulled over approximately 1 year ago. This was April 21st of last year. According to Sergeant Bonovitz, the phones were transferred on May 24th and picked up on June 16th. On July 13th, he tried to access the data. He eventually got it and started reviewing it in August 23rd of 21 is what he said. Then something happened with his computer. He was promoted and he transferred everything to Trooper Coles. Trooper Coles didn't look at it until January or February. Okay, so at this point in time, you know, there should be some amount of balancing between a citizen's personal property rights, the constitutional property rights that every citizen has, and these officers' ability or efforts to make a good faith investigation. Now, even if this court deemed that they can keep the phones, there's no evidence, there's no harm, and there's no possible outcome of keeping this cash other than to put pressure on my client. There's no basis to suggest these are ill-gotten. Cash is, you know, it could be received through legitimate means or illegitimate means. As counsel indicated very eloquently, that agents are allowed to assist with these type of documents. That is a proper service, okay? It is a legitimate service, and that's all anybody really testified went on here. To say they're not allowed to be paid from the proceeds, we would all agree. So if we were talking about the seizure of bank account records, that would be different. But you can't argue that cash is not the proceeds from these events. It can't be, because that's not how these proceeds are derived. There's nothing about this cash that leads any investigation closer or further to. I do believe it's just being maintained and kept on a harassing basis. And if this stuff is given back to my client, if the cash is given back, it doesn't change any nature of any current investigation. Trooper Coles couldn't identify the current status, couldn't identify when it would be completed, couldn't identify anything that he's found thus far other than these couple of chats where my client was offering a totally legitimate service. So, Your Honor, based on those things, there is no probable cause. I mean, we're not looking for possible cause, okay? And there is no probability here that a crime was committed. At least there hasn't been testimony. There certainly isn't testimony that the cash is proceeds of any purported crime. You know, I would just also finally indicate, especially in light, and there's been a lot said about alleged admissions they claim my client made. My client's admissions was that he committed old fraud. Those are the admissions. That wouldn't, now, whether it's true or not, and it's somewhat comical, but it wouldn't lead anybody to believe that this cash is more likely to be the proceeds of a criminal activity than anything else.
All right, Ms. Waddell, I have a question then. Given that the money is fungible, why at this point do you need to retain the value of the money? In other words, why can't the state repay Mr. Harris for the money taken and you can retain it for its evidentiary value? Since there's been no forfeiture claim, in other words, there's been no claim that you're entitled to the value of the money, only a claim that you needed for evidence.
Well, that's why, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question, Your Honor. We're not seeking forfeiture, but we're retaining it as evidence of a crime because Mr. Harris admitted that it was proceeds. We have that on audio. Again, I don't really want to turn over all of our evidence at this point, but he admitted that. My troopers testified to that these were proceeds from PPP loans. In fact, if my memory serves, he even said it was legal up until the point I got paid.
So what I'm perhaps I'm confused, but what you're saying that even though no forfeiture has been filed, because you believe and you believe you have evidence that it's the proceeds of a crime, it can be held indefinitely until a forfeiture proceeding is filed?
It can be held until the decision on whether or not charges are filed, Your Honor. So obviously, if charges are not filed, we would release it. Under the Omnibus Forfeiture Act, I'm sure the court's aware that statute was amended not too long ago, and you actually need a conviction in order to be able to forfeit those proceeds. So if at that point there was a conviction, then we could seek forfeiture at that point, if there was a conviction. But we're not there yet.
It's 64703.
You're asking me what the statute is, Your Honor?
Yes.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Is it? There's one that says exigent circumstances exist to preclude the obtaining of, well, that's obtaining of the court order, and there's, excuse me, probable cause to believe the property is subject to forfeiture. That's the only one I see that seems, unless I'm missing something.
Well, oh, okay. Are you thinking that we're relying on the statute to seize the property? If that's the case, we're not. We're seizing the property under the Fourth Amendment. We have probable cause to seize it, to believe a crime's been committed. We don't need a statute to give us the authority to do that. That's what police do. If they have probable cause to believe a crime has been committed, they can seize evidence of that crime. The issue, so we have possession right now. Forfeiture deals with ultimate ownership. We're not there yet. We may never get there. I don't know. It depends on if he's convicted, if we charge, whatever. But no, if we have probable cause to seize the property, we're in full compliance with the Fourth Amendment.
Okay, and under, see, I'm looking at a case here, another court of claims case, where it says, and I'll read to you, it's from Van Duyn, you probably were on it, versus State of Michigan.
Yep.
Fleischer says a law enforcement agency plainly has authority to seize properties pursuant to a valid search warrant. And 780-6552 provides property seized during the execution of a warrant shall be kept by the seizing officer so long as necessary for the purpose of being produced or used as evidence at trial. But here we don't have a search warrant. That's what I'm looking for. And maybe it's obvious and I'm just blowing past it. But that's what I'm trying to understand. And it seems to me what you're saying is once we seize it with probable cause, regardless of a search warrant, we can keep it until trial. Until a charging decision has been made, we can retain it as evidence. Okay.
So, and that's the statute. No, it's not a statute, Your Honor. Think of it this way. So the reason you get a warrant based on probable cause, correct? So if we have the same probable cause, but we have exigent circumstances, so we can't go get a warrant, it's the same logic, Your Honor. If probable cause exists, there's no Fourth Amendment violation.
Your Honor, may I briefly respond?
Yes, you may.
All right. Well, first of all, there's been a year to go get a search warrant. A search warrant could have been obtained at any point in time. Even the fact that the traffic stop had terminated doesn't mean the search warrant couldn't be obtained, but also indicate that counsel is incorrect about a recitation of the law. And I'm citing to MCL 600.74705-2A. The government must show that it had probable cause to believe that the property was subject to forfeiture and that the person filing a motion in a pending case or complaint knew about or consented to the commission of crime. Your Honor, the same statute.
Give me the number of the statute again, please.
Sure, 600.4705, subsection 2, subsection A.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And Your Honor, continuing and also talking about 4705, this is subsection 3, that if the government fails to meet its burden, the property will be returned or the lien will be discharged. Any interest earned on money must also be returned. So the state cannot simply bury its head in the sand and say, there's an investigation going on. It will go on for an indefinite amount of time and we don't owe you anything. That's not what the state of Michigan or any state is allowed to do. That would violate my client's due process rights. So the law on seizure, and again, it's the entirety of 600.4705, show that not only does the property need to be properly seized, but there has to be probable cause that it's subject to forfeiture. Okay, now in this case, you don't even have probable cause to arrest a guy, much less deprive him of his property rights. So, Your Honor, I mean, there's been nothing provided. I mean, I know that counsel, I believe, is being intentionally vague because I think it might hinder or help our investigation for whatever reason. And I believe the officers are also doing the same thing. But if nobody can tell us what crime has been committed, how do we have probable cause? They're talking about possibilities here, Your Honor. It's just not enough.
Ms. Waddell, was there probable cause to arrest at the scene?
I would argue there was, but they exercised their right not to arrest. I mean, they could have arrested him, sure, but they wanted to do a further investigation to determine what charges, if any, are filed.
Okay. Very good. I think probably since this motion could potentially resolve the case if I were to rule in favor of the defense, I don't think I need argument on the other matters in the complaint, in the amended complaint. I'm pretty comfortable ruling on them. Whether or not they would survive a C8 motion, but if you want, I guess now is the time. So if either of you wish to talk about those counts out, I will hear your argument rather than have to schedule something else.
You want us to respond to the counts in the amended complaint and why they should be thrown out? Is that what you're asking?
On the hearing notice, but if you are, I'll take it. But if you're not, we'll wait.
Well, Your Honor, my response to the amended complaint is due, I think, the end of the week, and I was obviously planning to file a motion to dismiss, but I'll just address it here again. So first of all, any claim against MSP is going to be barred by the 11th Amendment. Mr. Rubenstein's argument that this is a proprietary function is abrogated by the exact language in the statute. The definition of governmental function includes law enforcement activity. So there is no proprietary function here. There's no exception to governmental immunity. It should be tossed. You obviously can't sue the state under a 1983 action. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry to the reporter. Why does the 11th Amendment bar a state, an action against a state in state court?
It's Smith versus state, Your Honor. You cannot bring a 1983 action against the state because the state is not a person under 1983. So
that's a different. Okay, I got that.
Okay. So, and then there's also the, go ahead.
That's right.
So, and then again, for the claim and delivery action, the conversion action, again, conversion's a tort. Claim and delivery, they have to show that we're unlawfully detaining it. This hearing obviously takes care of that issue. He did not properly plead an equal protection claim. Obviously, you have to be a member of a protected class. Someone has to be similarly situated. He didn't have any of those elements included in his complaint. And that's all I'm remembering about the amended complaint right now, Your Honor. But that's essentially what our position is.
I'll review whether you file an answer or a motion. I'll review whatever you file, of course.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Rubenson, you want to say anything about the amended complaint in response?
Well, yes, Your Honor. I just want to be clear. This court ruled on the summary judgment motion already. It was denied on March 15th. I mean, that is law of the case. So that there's been no motion for reconsideration. So that ruling should not be upset. That ruling did allow me an opportunity to file an amended motion based on the federal claims and the conversion claims, which we did. If counsel is going to file a new summary motion, which I welcome her to, it should be on those points alone, because anything else is just rehashing the same thing that this court already made an order on. And the court denied summary on that, denied summary on the governmental immunity claim. I mean, really what we were here for today, at least my understanding, was that we were here to show cause why there would be probable cause basis for the continued retention of plaintiff's cash and 2 cell phones. So if counsel has a new motion to file, I think we should have an opportunity to file a response. And what's key about that, Judge, is that it's a show cause on why there is probable cause for continued retention, not just probable cause at the scene, but continued retention. And again, I think we're lacking on that. So with that, I trust the court's judgment and I appreciate your time.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate the witnesses' time and I appreciate Ms. Mata being here. And I'm going to sign off, but if you would advise the reporter if you wish to order a transcript. So thank you very much. I will, I think really we'll get something out, an opinion in order within 21 days. And by then, I guess if Ms. Waddell, you're filing something on the amended complaint, well, let's see first how this gets resolved. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge.
Everybody be well.
Does, and you'll let me know if you want a transcript or
Yeah,
I
can I
don't
just,
need one.
you
I
don't.
don't know that I need one either, but can I have your phone number just for my notes? I don't know how this is going to play out, so I want to at least have your number.
Yeah, let me give you, I'm with Hanson Renaissance Reporting. And they are, I have to write it down.
I have it. All right.
Do you have it? I'll just give
Well,
you.
no, I mean, I can write it down. Is what I meant to say.
567-8100. It's area code 586. Let me just double check that. Otherwise, I'm going to give you my cell phone because that I know. 567-8100. Area code 313. That's Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the company. Just give them a call if you need a transcript. I apologize for interjecting as much as I did.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We're all set. Bye-bye.
Hi, Mary.
Yeah.